Good evening from Washington. I'm Larry O'Connor. President Trump announced today on Truth Social that he fully expects to be arrested and indicted by Joe Biden and Merrick Garland's Justice Department in connection with the events of January 6th. Another indictment and another arrest of Donald Trump, the leading candidate to replace Joe Biden in next year's presidential election. Is this how a republic is supposed to work? Is this how a constitutional republic is supposed to operate? Joining us right now is Mercedes Schlapp, of course, political commentator, veteran of the Trump White House and the Trump campaign in 2020. Mercedes, first of all, every time this happens to Donald Trump, he ends up gaining 5 or 10 points. So politically, this actually sort of helps him in a way.
Well, I mean, first of all, you mentioned whether it was a constitutional republic or not. It sounds more like a banana republic, something you see in, for example, Latin American countries or even African countries. And it's just so, I think, discouraging for Americans because they're saying, wait a second here, why are you, Joe Biden and Merrick Garland, going after your political opponent? It's very clear that this continues to build this narrative that even the leftist media agrees with, which is that you know, Trump is guilty, that Trump needs to be put in jail, and that Trump can't run again. And so what you're seeing is with every indictment, Donald Trump's poll numbers continue to go up.
Yeah. And I don't think anybody would think that they would be doing this if he weren't running for president, if he weren't leading the race right now. And the latest poll shows that he's beating Joe Biden head to head. So this looks like this weaponization of the Justice Department. Here's what I'm not understanding, though, Mercedes, and maybe you paid closer attention than I did, but I followed the 2-year extravaganza of the January 6th Select Committee. I've seen all of the evidence. What have they got? There's no criminal action here by the president. It looks like a trumped-up charge.
Yeah, I mean, look, we saw during those J6 committee hearings that it was a very one-sided attempt to basically try to pretend that Donald Trump was guilty. I mean, you had these pseudo-Republicans and the never-Trumpers, Liz Cheney, Adam Kissinger. Obviously, they are no longer in office. They no longer represent, I would say, the Republican Party, with their target of saying Donald Trump is guilty and really going after his associates. You know, and I just feel that, look, while January 6th was you know, a dark moment in our history, when you look at the facts, it's very clear that Donald Trump had nothing to do with January 6th. You know, he was talking about a peaceful protest. He wasn't the instigator behind this. And what they've done to many of these J6 individuals who are in jail, I mean, they're not even getting the appropriate due process. Instead, they've just kept them in jail without letting them have their time to make sure that they can make their own case.
Yeah, and so now we've got this phony indictment out of Manhattan that the district attorney there has put forth. People have forgotten about that one now, right? And then you've got this indictment over the classified documents where, of course, you know, Joe Biden can have piles and piles of classified documents in his garage where Hunter is skulking around. No problem there. Now you've got this potential pending indictment over January 6th. Donald Trump is an American citizen. He has a right to a full, robust defense against these criminal charges. How can he possibly do that and at the same time run for president?
Look, several things, right? You also have the potential indictment in Georgia. This is the goal, to make sure that Donald Trump is very distracted, that Donald Trump feels the pressure from the judicial system to basically get out of the race. And that's what I think the goal is from the Democrats. Yeah. You know, for a long time, the Democrats, many of them had said, you know, that Donald Trump committed treason, you know, that he should not be able to run for office again. So they're going to put every obstacle in place so that Donald Trump cannot be the Republican candidate. And I have to say, Republicans, conservatives, even independents, I mean, are pushing back and saying, this is an outrage. This is an abuse of power coming from the Biden administration. And, you know, not only do they do this with all these indictments, but think about the Russian hoax, Larry.
Oh, yeah.
That lasted for multiple years, and that at the end turned out to be a farce.
Right. And by the way, this also comes just days after a 2-week investigation over cocaine left in the White House, and they claim, we have no idea who did it. We guess we'll never know. Case closed. Every single American watching this place out shows they see the double standard, and they see that people are treated differently in the eyes of the law. This is so degrading to our republic.
Well, Larry, you've been at the White House many times, and that area that they specifically talked about in where the cocaine was left, it's not a very heavy traffic area.
Right.
And the mere fact is that the Secret Service cannot identify the individual. I just can't believe it. I just don't believe it. It is truly something that has left us perplexed, and I think the White House is hoping that this story goes away.
And Mercedes, let's face it, Abby, you worked at the White House. You worked at 2 White Houses, and there are fine people in the Secret Service. They do an incredible job of keeping the president and the cabinet and the staff safe there. But let's face it, someone's able to bring in a foreign substance in a plastic. That could have been anthrax, Mercedes. They were able to bring it in under the Secret Service's nose. That is a failure of the Secret Service in one respect, so they shouldn't have been the ones to investigate this in the first place. They have a conflict of interest.
Right, and if it is a staffer, remember the FBI, before you even enter and get a job at the White House, you have to go through a series of questions where they ask you, have you taken illegal substances? Have you taken illicit drugs? And so I think the mere fact that they couldn't get to the bottom of this is very problematic. And as you mentioned, it could have been anthrax. It could have been something that obviously would have been dangerous for the staff.
Right.
I mean, cocaine is dangerous, but something that really could have impacted the White House. So it's very troubling that the Secret Service decided to say, you know what, we can't figure this out. And it really, I think, is very frustrating to the rest of the American people.
Yeah, you listen, you know your presidential politics, and I know that you're as fascinated as I am in how this entire Republican nomination process is playing out. We had a big weekend last weekend with Tucker Carlson interviewing many of the candidates one-on-one in Iowa, and then Charlie Kirk's great event with Turning Point down in West Palm Beach, Florida. In your opinion, the other Republicans in the race, they have every right to run against Donald Trump, of course, but they have to figure out a way to run in such a way that they're supportive of the president, but at the same time make the case that maybe it's time for a new choice. And they also have to voice outrage about what's going on with the Justice Department. In your mind, who's actually done the best job of sort of threading that needle and walking that tightrope of being just as outraged about the crimes, the criminal behavior of the Justice Department against Donald Trump, but at the same time saying, vote for me?
Hands down, Vivek Ramaswamy has been the strongest candidate in terms of threading that needle, talking about the America First politics, talking about that Vivek is presenting ideas without attacking Donald Trump. I think what he's realized, as has, I would say, Tim Scott, is you can't out-Trump Trump. And that's been the biggest error that Ron DeSantis and his campaign team, what they've done. When you have Ron DeSantis going after President Trump on the border, that's the most ridiculous direction a campaign can take, because it was Donald Trump who actually brought to light the horrors at the border as he focused to build the wall, as he focused to make sure that he had policies in place that would discourage an open border policy. So I think Ron DeSantis has really missed the mark. He went after the president even on trying to paint him as this extreme when it comes to LGBTQ issues, which was like a dumb ad they put in place. They actually put an ad out where they used an AI voiceover on President Trump. Again, a fake ad, in my opinion. I really believe that Ron DeSantis needs to fire his campaign team. It's been a disservice to him, and not and if he even has a chance of trying to gain some leverage against the president.
It's like Rudy Giuliani's 2008 campaign apparatus just stayed there in Florida and picked up with Ron DeSantis. Every mistake so far. There's more to come. Keep it here on O'Connor Tonight. You know, we love the CPAC conference. I've been there every year for the last 12 years now, either on the stage or broadcasting from Media Row. It's a great gathering of conservatives from all around the world. It's run by the American Conservative Union, but they do more than just CPAC. Every year they put out the ACU congressional ratings, rating every single member of Congress in the House and the Senate based on their votes, based on their agenda, based on their record. And they rate them from the perspective of conservatives here in America. Joining us is Mercedes Schlapp from American Conservative Union. And the ratings are out tonight. Congratulations. I know it's a huge effort.
Thank you.
Can you talk to us a little bit about first the mechanics on how you guys crunch all these numbers and figure out exactly how these ratings are determined?
Well, not only do we do the federal ratings, meaning the congressmen on the House and then obviously the senators as well, we do this in every state legislature, which is just simply amazing. Wow. So the 50 states also receive ratings. This gives a chance for our grassroots activists to know is my member of Congress, is my state legislature, are they conservative? Are they conservative enough? Are they voting for the issues that matter to me? And tonight we do our annual CPAC ratings event. We have over 100 members of Congress coming to the event. What we have found is that half of the Republicans right now on the Hill, both on the House side and the Senate side, are conservative, Larry, which is just amazing.
Yeah.
And the CPAC ratings has been around for 52 years, if you can believe it.
Wow.
And it's the gold standard for ratings. It's the one that the members use to go back home and say, listen, I've kept my contract with you. I am voting on conservative issues from energy to foreign policy to domestic policy. So we look at all the different votes each year and then, of course, have our scorecard. And that's how we go about making sure that our members are keeping their promise to their constituents.
So let's talk about, you rate them from worst to first, or first to worst.
Yeah.
Let's start with the Senate. Perfect 100% scores from the American Conservative Union. You've got Senator Mike Braun of Indiana, Senator Mike Lee of Utah, and Senator Rand Paul from Kentucky. Mike Braun and Mike, let's start with those two. Mike Braun, I don't think anyone would be surprised to see Mike Lee on that list. Mike Braun, though, what a solid effort out of the Hoosier State.
Yeah, they call them the Breakfast Club. They're solid in terms of their conservative votes. Ted Cruz is also up there, as is Marsha Blackburn. I mean, we are happy if they make it over 80%. So, we love the perfect scores, but we definitely want to keep them up that 80% time frame. I think the one that's been a big disappointment, obviously, is Mitch McConnell, someone who had a decently conservative record for quite some time. And that percentage went down to 58% because you've seen that Mitch McConnell truly has voted for and supported the Democrats' efforts when it comes to the omnibus bills as well. And that you've seen that the leadership in general, the Senate leadership, has been hugely disappointing. The House leadership, however, they've done really well, Larry.
Yeah.
You have Speaker Kevin McCarthy over 80%. You have Congressman Steve Scalise over 80%. Lee Stefanik, we've seen a huge improvement in her scores. So it's really the House that's driving the conservative agenda and keeping true to the conservative values.
Amen. And I do want to get to the House side in a moment, but on the Senate, John Thune, I must say, he is in leadership, and he fell into that 80 to 89%. So that was the best of the people in leadership. Rand Paul is an interesting rating here at 100% because Rand Paul is sort of seen a little bit off the beaten path of traditional Republicans with regard to national security. I'm curious on the national security front and the criteria they're used for the votes because, I mean, for instance, Rand Paul is not really on board with a lot of the votes with regard to committing money to Ukraine. Was that issue singled out here in your ratings? How does one fall in line?
As long as they vote on these different components, or in the case of Ukraine or in the case of China, they do look at this. They do analyze this. Obviously, when it comes to on the conservative side, we don't necessarily want to see excessive spending. In addition to that, we want to see accountability and transparency. That's a big issue. And obviously, China plays a big role as well in making sure that we're tough on China.
Yeah, and listen, as far as I'm concerned, as long as Rand Paul is there going after Anthony Fauci on a daily basis, he wins every scorecard for me with regard to these ratings.
Right. That's right.
Let's go to the House. I'm thrilled to see regular guests of this program gaining 100% record from you, including Kevin Hearn, Jody Heiss, Jim Jordan, Thomas Massey, Ralph Norman, Greg Steube, Chip Wright. Seriously, it's like my weekly rundown here on O'Connor Tonight. The House has a robust number of Republicans who are conservative and really carrying that spear.
Right. Well, Larry, I'll give you all the credit for making sure you would keep those members in line.
As well you should.
I have to say I'm really impressed by the list of the conservatives in the House of Representatives. And the other piece that's very interesting is that many of them are chairmen of different committees.
Yes,
you see Mark Green, he's
that.
chairman of the Homeland Security, the Committee on Homeland Security, obviously Jim Jordan, who runs the Judiciary Committee. So what you find is that they're the ones driving the agendas in these committees. It's where you're seeing the significant impact of pushing through legislation that helps the American people, focused on conservative values, protecting families, protecting the First Amendment, protecting the Second Amendment, and making sure that we keep Joe Biden and his administration accountable. So that, to me, I think is it's a very promising situation that we're seeing right now in the House.
All right, so we talked about who was first. Let's talk about who's worst. Susan Collins in the Senate, 38% ACU rating. I mean, forget about being under 50%, under 40%. I mean, that's not a good look for a Republican.
Well, she does better than Democrats who get 0%, like Elizabeth Warren. But here's the deal.
Hold on. If the best thing you can say about Susan Collins as a Republican is she's better than Elizabeth Warren, that's not.
Let's remember, Susan Collins did vote for example, did support the appointment of Brett Kavanaugh to be on the Supreme Court. That was a very big win. I remember being part of those negotiations where Donald Trump would bring in Susan Collins. They would have these really important discussions about Brett Kavanaugh, and she at the end supported him. With that being said, Susan Collins is the one who in many cases supports Senator Schumer, and supports the Democrats. It's like a Mitt Romney, for example, who's in the 50s, right? So these Republicans are the swing Republicans. I almost view these moderate Republicans as the new moderate Democrats, because we don't have any more moderate Democrats anymore. They've all gone so far to the left that now you find like a Senator Schumer depending on a Susan Collins and on like a Mitt Romney to get to that 60 vote threshold when it's a non-budget item. So, I think that that's what you have seen in terms of the Senate, where you have this group of senators kind of in the middle, trying to make sure that they can, find compromise with the Democrats.
Meanwhile, it should also be noted, comparatively speaking, because everybody talks about Joe Manchin. Joe Manchin from West Virginia. Joe Manchin is a maverick. Joe Manchin could switch parties. As bad as Susan Collins is as a conservative at a 38%, Joe Manchin is the best Democrat there is. He's at 16%.
Right.
So in other words, your worst Republican is still better than your best Democrat.
Better than right. And so this is really fascinating because you're seeing no labels. That you're having Joe Manchin really identify with this no labels group, which is that Joe Lieberman is part of. And there's this talk if Joe Manchin is going to run as an independent. And they're looking to see if they are able to get ballot access on all 50 states. I mean, it's too premature to determine what Joe Manchin's going to do. But we know one thing, it's going to be very hard for Joe Manchin to run for Senate in a Republican state like West Virginia, which is where you have a number of candidates already announced, like Alex Mooney and Jim Justice as well. So I think for Joe Manchin, he's trying to find out what's his next gig. Where he's been good is ensuring that we don't lose a filibuster in the Senate. So that's where he has supported Mitch McConnell. But then again, you see him extreme on other issues where he has backed the Democrats.
Well, we'll have to take up this whole no labels thing another time, though. But if Joe Manchin does, I know a lot of school of thought, conventional wisdom here in town is that Joe Manchin could pull votes from the Republican. I don't see it that way.
Actually, I think he pulls votes from the Democrats,
100%.
and I think the Democrats are more concerned about a Joe Manchin getting in.
Completely.
Now, if Larry O'Connor gets into the race, that can pull from the Republicans.
That will never happen. Mercedes Schlapp, thank you so much for joining us. Congratulations on the ACU ratings. Very excited to have a first look at it right here tonight, as it just got released a couple of hours ago. There's more to come on O'Connor Tonight. The kids are not all right. 44% of millennials want it to be a criminal act if you misgender somebody because I'm lost. I'm not sure why. What's the rationale behind this? Let's bring in someone who might know. She's a senior reporter over at the Daily Signal. She's notorious MMO, Mary Margaret Olahan. Mary Margaret, this is terrifying, actually. What's going on here?
Well, as a millennial, I am also very concerned about this, but I'm not super surprised. This whole generation, my generation, has been brought up and just honestly lives their lives very according to the whims of their empathy. We have been really just taught to worry about other people's feelings more than a lot of facts, more than a focus on the reality of situations. And so now we find that half of this generation apparently is okay with criminalizing
Yeah.
using the wrong pronouns for someone. That's wild. And it's blatantly unconstitutional. And I highly doubt that you would find a court that would be willing to say otherwise. But at the same time, it's very disturbing to know that these trends are there and to see how they might affect future generations.
Listen, I'm actually pro-empathy. I'm pro-compassion. I'm against actually going out of your way to insult somebody. I think we should do our best to try to find common ground. But criminalizing someone's lack of empathy, and of course, it's always one side of the political spectrum who's allowed to define what real empathy is or not. Like, for instance, I have a lot of empathy for the children who are being led down the path of so-called gender-affirming care. I think there should be more empathy for the kids involved here, but that kind of empathy, you know, we don't account for that.
Right. And when it comes to gender affirming care, we're told that we have to use that phrase.
Right.
You know, you see a lot of media outlets using the phrase anti-trans bills when they're talking about bills that are literally created to protect children from irreversible surgeries and hormones that will impact their lives forever. But the left calls that care. And if we call it something else, we are the ones that are not empathetic. We are the ones that hate children and want them to die. That's what we're told. And you see this kind of across the spectrum with hate speech.
Yeah.
We are told that it's hate speech to say that abortion is wrong, to say that we want to protect the unborn. We're told that it's hate speech if we improperly talk about gender, reproductive care. Even when it came to COVID, there was a lot of stuff that was considered hate speech when we were just talking about realities. And like you were saying, Larry, it's only one side of the aisle that seems to be allowed to define the terms. And we hear all these new terms, new descriptions for things that we stand against. But the left is very creative at coming up with more consumable ways of talking about these things. And the right is kind of forced to play defense all the time and try and catch up and to be able to talk about it as well.
First of all, the idea that me calling Dylan Mulvaney, who is a biological male who dresses up like a woman, but demands to be called she. If I am to refer to Dylan Mulvaney as a man and misgender him, the idea that that is suddenly hate speech is one thing. Let's start with that. How is that hate speech by actually being accurate, truthful, factual, scientific?
Well, it's hate speech, Larry, because we live in an age when truth is no longer acceptable. And so when the left or when ideologues are confronted with the truth, they know that they don't have a lot of recourse other than to call us hateful, because when you have the truth, it's very hard to combat that, especially when you're presented with facts and reality in a balanced way. And so there's nothing easier than to call that hate speech, because then your opponent looks evil, hurtful. They hate the other person that's trying to live their life. And we do have the truth on our side. We do have facts on our side. And I think that conservatives, it would help them a lot to, as you were saying, be empathetic, be sympathetic, be kind and generous in their dialogue with the other side and their dialogue on these topics. But at the same time, we don't budge on the truth.
On the truth, right, exactly. There's actually great empathy rooted in the truth. That's what our faith tells us as well. Many descriptions of hate speech goes like this: speech that is intended to foster hatred against individuals or groups, and then they list all the groups. But see, that's the problem, that word intended. How is a government entity, in this case, as millennials are suggesting it should be a criminal act, that means the police are involved, the courts are involved, how are they to determine what my intention is based on the words I use? This is why in England we're seeing people who are arrested for silently praying on the sidewalk in front of an abortion clinic because they've decided that their intention is in some way to marginalize people. Boy, I get real scared, Mary Margaret Olahan, when the government is determining what's going on inside my head.
Oh, I do too. And as soon as we were talking about this, I was thinking about these instances in Great Britain and England where people are being arrested for silently praying.
Yeah.
There's a crazy, crazy clip where police confront a woman, I believe, who was praying outside an abortion clinic. She wasn't even standing on the property. She was standing across the street, praying in her head. And they had to ask her, what were you doing? And she told them she was praying in her head. And then they arrested her and took her down to the police station.
Literally thought police. Literally thought police. What were you thinking? Were you praying to a higher being? That's it, you're under arrest.
It was so unbelievable, so dangerous. Thankfully, that woman has the support of ADF International. They have been really great at getting the word out about her case.
Yeah.
I can't remember what the latest development is, but I know she's been fighting back. And there's also a priest that was in a similar situation in England. Whole bunch of examples to that effect. Also in Canada, in Australia, we're seeing crazy instances of this kind of punishment for alleged hate speech or thought violations. Thankfully, we don't see that much of that in the United States so far, but with all these millennials thinking this way, it's very possible some of them will enter into high positions that could impact our laws and the ability of Americans to think and speak freely.
Senator Ben Cardin, Democrat of Maryland, not a millennial, said recently, if you espouse hate, you're not protected under the First Amendment. Howard Dean, former governor, former presidential candidate, said hate speech is not protected by the First Amendment. Mary Margaret Olohan, hate speech is in fact protected by the First Amendment.
Well, I think truth speech in general is protected by the First Amendment. Obviously, there's examples of things that are incredibly offensive that you could say that you shouldn't say. But at the same time, this is the United States of America. You have the ability to say things.
Yeah. And by the way, I'm not conceding the fact that so-called misgendering or using the appropriate proper, the twisted Orwellian language. You're accused of misgendering when you're actually using the truthful, factual, accurate gender-specific pronoun for somebody. They call that misgendering. I'm not willing to concede that that is hate speech, but even if it is, that is protected. So how do we turn this around for your generation? What's the best and most effective way to gently and sympathetically, but also firmly, assert the First Amendment here and explain that no, this in no way should be a criminal act?
Well, I think you need more people in the public sphere just speaking the truth in a calm and collected and compelling way. Even some conservatives will try and say that, using the right pronouns for someone that identifies with another gender is hurtful and wrong. They'll also say that we should use more of the left's terms to talk about these topics to draw them to us. I would disagree with that. I would say that we should be speaking the truth in a way that's not designed to hurt someone. So, we don't want to hurt anyone. We should be loving and kind and compassionate, but at the same time, we need to talk about the truth.
Yeah.
So if a man is a man, we should call him a man. If a woman is a woman, we should call her a woman. That doesn't mean we need to use pronouns to their face to hurt their feelings, but if it's an appropriate context, we should be using them in the appropriate context. The conversations we have about these things, we shouldn't be scared. We should be willing to speak up for the truth. And the more we just factually and accurately talk about these topics, the rest of the country will be able to see, okay, this is how we should be talking about this. This is how we should be understanding this. For example, when you read a story from the Associated Press about gender affirming care, this euphemism for transgender surgeries and hormones for kids, often for kids, for adults. When you see that phrase in an Associated Press story, that phrase is there. It's designed to kind of cover up what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So your average American that reads that, they're not going to get what gender affirming care is. They're going to be confused. When I write a story about that, I say transgender surgeries and hormones, often in the context of kids. I want people to know what I'm talking about. And I might even say we're talking about really graphic surgeries, and I'll name the surgery. I'll talk about what it entails, often really graphic, so I'm not going to say it here. But I purposefully do that so people understand what I'm talking about. And I think that is a much greater service to the American public than using euphemisms to hide what we're talking about.
Well said. And it's also, again, it has the benefit of having science and fact on your side as you're doing it that way. And to reiterate that, we went from sex change operation to sex reassignment surgery, and now it's actually called gender affirming care, but it all does the same thing. It actually changes somebody's sex, physically changes their sex. How is that gender affirming? It's actually quite the opposite. We got to leave it there. Mary Margaret Olohan, talking about her generation. Appreciate you joining us. There's more to come on O'Connor Tonight. Any regular viewer of this program knows that the gender ideology activism that we're seeing permeate throughout our society is a major topic of conversation for us. We care deeply about it. The organized left has already pushed their agenda to our schools, even affecting kindergartners in some cases. But conservative activists are finally pushing back, and they're getting organized. Just look at Austin, Texas, where they've got an event coming up in August. Here, take a look at it. It's called Let Women Speak. That seems like a reasonable idea. Let women actually step up and voice their opinions in opposition of things like gender ideology, the erasure of women, protecting women in sports, mutilation of healthy bodies, things like that. All the hard-fought women's rights that have been earned over the last many decades by women in this country. Austin, known for their sensibilities, their liberal ideology, they should be open to the idea of letting women speak. Well, not so much. The organizers put together an Eventbrite invitation so that people could register and sign up for the event, and well, look what happened. Eventbrite sent an email saying that this is out of guidelines and their terms of services specifically regarding hateful, dangerous, or violent content at events. Violent content, Eventbrite. That doesn't sound so bright. Joining us now is the organizer of this event, who's now going toe-to-toe with Eventbrite over it. She's Michelle Evans, a chapter leader for Independent Women's Network. Michelle, I am stunned by this, that just allowing women to speak their mind can't happen. It's violence, it's offensive. That means there's only one idea and perspective that's allowed in this discussion?
That's correct. It's the male fetishists, the males who are pretending to be women in order to enter our spaces. They are the only ones that are allowed to have an opinion on this matter.
This is scheduled for when? This is August, right?
August 12th.
Now, so far it's just Eventbrite that's trying to cancel you. The city of Austin or wherever you're going to be doing that, are you getting any other pressure from any other affiliated organizations?
For security purposes, we have not released the location. The violence that has happened at these events in the past has been due to or at the hands of counter-protesters. So the reason we had an Eventbrite link was to bring attention to the event, but also to raise some money to pay for things like security.
Sure. Yeah, and I've been to these events before, and I've spoken at events where a lot of times you go out there, you put the Eventbrite out there, you let them know the general, it's going to be in the city, and then once people are signed up right beforehand, you say, okay, here are the details. That's pretty common, actually.
Yes.
Did you reach out to Eventbrite and ask them what is specifically hateful or violent about your event?
Through my network, Independent Women's Network, we did send Eventbrite a letter. We've tweeted them consistently since this happened on Thursday. It's gotten millions of views, retweeted by Joe Rogan, Jordan Peterson. And as of yet, they have not responded. The only response they have given to me is that ticket holders were immediately refunded with no context or explanation. So the funds that we had raised as of that date were lost immediately.
I'm sorry, I just want to point, I know it's Austin, but it's Texas. We think a little higher of Texas and what might be go on there. Have you heard from the governor's office or the attorney general's office about this?
We have heard from neither. I did get a call from Senator Marsha Blackburn's office just wondering what the background was on the issue. Nothing from my senators or my governor. And one of the reasons we wanted to have this event, and we're continuing to have this event, is to call upon the governor to put a Women's Bill of Rights on a special session call. He's almost promised and guaranteed that there will be multiple special sessions upcoming. A Women's Bill of Rights was filed and killed in the Texas House during our regular session. And that's not sufficient for us.
Yeah. I think maybe part of the problem here is the name of the event is called Let Women Speak. And let's face it, I mean, the organized left on this issue, they can't even define what woman is. So they got very confused.
Right. And we're not being exclusive in that way. What we're doing is saying we're not asking for permission. We're not saying that only women can speak. This is a demand to allow us to have our opinion on this issue because disproportionately it affects women more than anyone.
So Eventbrite just deletes this, says, I love the euphemism, it's been unpublished. They've canceled you.
Yes.
And they won't participate in it. They say that you're involved in dangerous, hateful behavior by daring to allow women to speak their minds. What are the alternatives now? Because Eventbrite, they're pretty big. They're a huge organization, and they're very useful for things like this.
The great thing is we have this kind of underground community of women who feel the same way on this issue, and men as well. And so yesterday I was connected with an emerging anti-cancel culture ticketing platform called Groupie, G-O-R-U-P-I. I'm working with them to get a landing page back up and running and not be at risk of cancellation or losing any funds. So I'm hopeful about that.
It's such an important perspective. And by the way, I just don't understand any issue facing our country right now that doesn't deserve a full airing. This is what that tells you that you're on the right side of this issue, because the other side doesn't even want you to be able to speak. At any time their ideas and their arguments can't stand up to even hearing an alternative perspective, you know that it's the wrong side of the issue.
Right. And this is the side that thinks silence is violence, but also thinks words are violence. So it's a constant contradictory in terms.
All the things that I don't like are violence. All the things that disagree with me are violence. That makes it easier.
Right. Having this open forum allows us to have criticism. If you don't like that Eventbrite is platforming us, you're welcome to criticize that. But to say that we shouldn't have that platform is completely antithetical to our fundamental values here in this country. This is such a simple thing. It's just women gathering in the public square with a mic and a PA to air their dissent to particular ideologies or ideas.
Yeah, and these are critically important ideas. In our final minute here, I want you to expand on one part of this, because it speaks to me, because I think it's so undebatable, where you say you're speaking about the erasure of women. Flesh that out for me, because people say, oh, redefining women. No, it's actually eliminating women, what we've known to be women.
You're erasing the concept of womanhood, or the biological truth of womanhood, in language and in law, by allowing men to be mothers and women are birthing persons with bonus holes. Men can breastfeed while women only chest feed. So you're taking away the unique power that women have naturally, biologically, physiologically, and turning it into a costume that a man can put on. Yeah. This, our group of women, we are equal to men, but we are not the same. And so you can't just put on a wig and some makeup and say that I am now a woman. You can't take hormones and say I'm not a woman, because we're not a hormone level either. There is so much to us that begins with biology and extends from there.
Well said. And by the way, I'll add to that so much of what you're describing here has to do with post-adolescent adult males who, for whatever reason, decide to put on this. But the actual effects of this ideology are devastating to prepubescent young girls who are being told that their blossoming womanhood is not good enough. It's not. Right. It's devastating. We got to leave it there. There's so much more to discuss. Yeah. I want to have you back before your event. We want to make sure that once we know where it is, that it is jam-packed, and we'll ensure that. Michelle Evans out of Austin, Independent Women's Network. There's more to come on O'Connor Tonight. Something pretty big is happening up in Canada, and no, it's not just those wildfires that they still can't seem to put out. I had orange muck in the air here in Washington, D.C., thanks to those Canadians. No, it's not that. And it's certainly not a professional hockey team that can win a championship, because those guys haven't won a Stanley Cup since 1993. No. It has to do with a similar issue that we care about here in the States. The government-run schools pushing a radical gender and gay sexual agenda on children behind their parents' back, in many cases circumventing the principles and values and even religious faith of those parents, to instill in the children, in the schools, this radical agenda. And the people who are most upset about it right now are Muslims in Canada. They have taken to the streets, they have protested. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau sat down with some Muslims in Canada, in Calgary, at a mosque to talk about this issue. One of them said, hey, why are you doing this? I'm trying to raise my kid in my faith, and your government, you're undermining it in our schools. Watch his response.
I've heard this concern many times, and I know that it is a very real issue. First of all, there is an awful lot of misinformation and disinformation out there. People on social media, particularly fueled by the American right wing, are spreading a lot of untruths about what's actually in the provincial curriculum. Like, the federal government doesn't control what's taught in schools. That's the provincial government that controls it.
Yeah, it wasn't us. It was those provincial governments. But he is a good-looking young man, isn't he? Reminds me of a young Fidel Castro, but that's a whole other story. There's misinformation out there and disinformation spread on social media, mostly by the American right wing. So all you Canadian Muslims, you're just being brainwashed by the American right wing. That's the best you've got? Really? Kind of insulting, isn't it, to his Canadian citizens of Muslim faith that they're so stupid and naive and gullible that they'd be brainwashed by we conservatives on social media. And none of this is happening. No. All right, well, listen, the last thing we want to do is spread misinformation. The last thing we want to do here is to confuse this issue and get it wrong. So a couple of questions for Prime Minister Trudeau or any member of his party up in Canada, either at the federal level or at the provincial level. Clear this up for us. Will the schools in Canada instruct young children about gender ideology, gender dysphoria, gender transition, sexual practices without their parents' consent? Yes or no? No need to extrapolate. It really is a yes or no question. Will you have in your curriculum issues such as this of a sensitive sexual nature without informing and getting the consent of parents? And at what age, by the way? For instance, here in America, we have an issue with a lot of books that are being introduced, even at the elementary school level, that have issues that are of a very sensitive sexual nature that many parents would not like their children to be exposed with without it being framed within the context of that family's principles, that family's values, and that family's religious faith. So, Prime Minister Trudeau, will parents be included in the discussion about what books are allowed in the provincial school systems? Yes or no? No spin. No, let me explain this to you like you're a stupid moron from America. No. It's a yes or no question. Do parents have a say? How about this one? If a 10-year-old girl approaches a teacher and says that they want to change their gender and be identified as a boy, will the parents be informed? Yes or no? How about another question? Not to pick at a sore wound, but you guys do like your hockey on an amateur level up there. We know you don't play it professionally, otherwise you would have won a Stanley Cup more recently than the early 90s. But if a man of 17 years old wants to play ice hockey on a woman's team and identify as a woman, will you allow that to happen? Will there be more injuries involved in women's hockey if a young man is allowed to play on that team? And will the girls on that team be exposed to naked male genitalia in the locker room without their consent? Yes or no? We don't want to disinform. We want the truth, and we'd love to hear your response. And while you're at it, put out those fires. I'm trying to train for a race down here, and I can't breathe. That's it for tonight. There's more to come tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, I'll see you on the radio.